Hello everyone, my name is Hannah. Welcome to a new video and happy day 8 of Bookmas. So today's video is going to be all about my favorite books that I read in 2021. I have quite the list here. I'm not sure, I don't even know how many I have. If it's 10, 11, I don't know, let me count one. I have 10, my top 10 books that I read in 2021. Okay, cool. I'm glad to see that I'm super prepared for this video. I'm also not going to be doing them in any specific order, although I will say what my number one favorite book of the year was. I had a top 3, which I guess I could do my top 3, but I do know what my number one book is. I went back and forth on a couple of them, so I guess I'll save those for the end of the video and tell you what my top 3 are, but the rest of these are in no particular order. They're just books that I read and loved. They're all 5 stars and they're new favorites. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is a book that I read more towards the beginning of the year, and it is the second in a fantasy romance series, and that book is A Strange Hymn by Laura Thalassa. This is book 2 in the Bargainer series. So the first book is called Rhapsodic. Rhapsodic popped up on my Goodreads and said, because you liked A Court of Mist and Fury, try Rhapsodic. And I was like, okay, you got me right away there. So I picked up Rhapsodic and I loved it, but then I wanted to read the rest of the series, and Jan has pointed this out to me, my friend Jan from Jan Agaton, that I love the second books in series, because this is the second book and I loved it even more than the first. And that's kind of a bit of a pattern here, because you'll see there are a couple other second book in a series that have made my favorites. So I'm not surprised by this at all. But basically the series is about this girl, Callie, who is a siren, and she starts making these bargains with this guy, the bargainer. And basically she asks him for a favor, and every time she does that, she gets this bead added to a bracelet, and he's gonna cash that favor in, and it can be whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And it's this magical contract, she can't break off the bracelet or anything. And she kind of develops a little bit of a crush on him, honestly. She feels very alone in this world, and so she makes these bargains for him to continue to spend time with her, basically. And she gets this whole thing of beads, and then one day he just disappears and she has no idea what for, and he's gone for 7 years. And then one day he comes back and she's upset, obviously, because he just cut her off. And that's really all I'm going to say about the series. It's a fantasy romance, so if you like fantasy romance, highly recommend it. I think the world that this series is set in is super, super fascinating, and I really, really like Laura Thalassa's writing. The way she wrote Callie, she's just such a badass, and there are some really funny parts, there's some really heartfelt parts, obviously some really sexy parts. But yeah, the second book was definitely my favorite. I love Rhapsodic as well, but the second book blew me out of the water. So I recommend the series as a whole, but this one definitely made my favorites of 2021. I'm going to continue on that vein of fantasy romance books that I read towards the beginning of the year, and this is another second book in a series, and that is A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is book 2 in the Blood and Ash series, so the first book is From Blood and Ash, and yeah, second book in a series, so I guess that's my thing. Court of Mist and Fury is the second book in a series. This book is, Rhapsodic is, or A Strange Hymn is. So there's so many that it's kind of funny, actually. I would be very curious to look at all of my series and pick which ones the second book is my favorite. But anyways, let's talk about A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. So the first book, From Blood and Ash, follows Poppy, who is the maiden, and she's not really allowed to be seen by people or touched by people. She has to wear this veil, and she's really isolated, and she's in this kingdom, and you don't really understand why she's the maiden and why that's important. But there's this attack on her guards, and her personal guard ends up getting killed, and so she gets assigned this new guard, Hawk, who kind of breaks the rules a little bit, and he doesn't mind talking to her or touching her, and they develop a bit of a romance. Poppy does not like being the maiden. She wants to live her life and explore what life has to offer, and she kind of hates that she's isolated. And there's also this constant threat on their kingdom of these things called the Craven, which are like a mix between a vampire and a zombie, honestly. And I love the series so much. I loved where the first book left off, and so I was really, really excited to jump right into this. As soon as I finished From Blood and Ash, I bought Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. And this is the special Illumicrate edition, I think. Is it signed? Nope, I guess not. Oh, no, it is. It's signed. It's got like the pretty stenciled edges and the end papers, and it's got like, I mean, come on. Yeah, so I just really, really like this book, and I like where the story gets to. So this was my favorite in the series so far, and the fourth book comes out in March, I think, of 2022, and it is definitely on my highly anticipated or most anticipated of 2022. But yeah, one of the best fantasy romances I've read. It's great if you're like wanting to read fantasy, but nothing like too serious. It's just a really, really fun book. So this definitely made my top. I would probably, if I was going to rank these, I would say that this is probably in my top 5. All right, the next one is just a regular contemporary adult romance, no fantasy in here, and that is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I read Beach Read last year, I think it was, or maybe the year before, I can't remember, but it was one of my favorites of whatever year it was that I read it in. So I was definitely anticipating People We Meet on Vacation, and I'm so glad that I picked it up. I put it off for a very long time because I wasn't in a romance mood, and honestly, when I read this, it put me in my romance reading mood that lasted for months. This is so good. It is about Alex and Poppy, who are best friends, and they take a trip every summer for like the last 10 years. They've taken a trip together, and something happens on one of these trips that gives them a falling out a bit, and they don't talk very much anymore, and you're kind of trying to figure out like, okay, what is it that happened? Because you get flashbacks of like some of the trips that they have taken in the past, and you see like this really beautiful, fun friendship. So you're just rooting for them the whole time because you just want them to fall in love. And then you see the present when they're like no longer on speaking terms, and then Poppy is like, listen, we should have like one final trip together. And so they do, and it ends up being a bit disastrous, but it's a really, really fun read. And I really like the friends to lovers when you get like the flashbacks of why they're such good friends, because if you're just like thrown into it, you don't really get to see the development there. So I really liked seeing like the build up to the relationship rather than like just diving right in, if that makes any sense. But yeah, this was such a fun read. This is probably one that I'll reread like every summer because it just has those summery vibes. You can tell even from the cover. It's just the perfect read to read like while you're sitting out in the sun, like by the lake or something. I just love this one so much. Then I have 2 books that I read pretty close together. I read them for a video, which was reading books that I picked up specifically because of Steph Bohr. So the first one is The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. To be fair, this book like blew up on TikTok, and then Books with Chloe picked it up for her Patreon book club pick. So I picked it up for all of those reasons. And honestly, I think this book deserves the hype. It is definitely a slow burn read. So if you're like just ready to get into it, maybe this isn't going to be for you. But if you don't mind the slow build romance where it's like dragged out a little bit and you're kind of like begging for it by the end of it, this is perfect for you. It's a fake dating, like enemies to lovers or hate to love kind of situation. Lena has this coworker who she overheard saying something kind of rude about her, and so she's hated him ever since then. And he's kind of like, everybody at work is kind of like, yeah, he's kind of a jerk. So she doesn't feel that bad about not liking him. And he overhears her one day saying like she needs to have a date to her sister's wedding in Spain because she told her family like, oh yeah, I'll bring my American boyfriend. And she's like, oh, I don't have an American boyfriend. And so he's like, yeah, I'll do that for you. And she's like, why would you ever offer that? Like, that makes no sense. We do not like each other. We do not get along. But he actually has a reason why he wants to have somebody to fake date him. And let me just say, Aaron Blackford is such a little cinnamon roll. I love him so much. And I really, really liked this story. It is a slow start, so it took me a little while to get into it and be like, okay, yes, I'm totally loving this. But once it gets into it where they like are forced to be together, it's amazing. I mean, it takes probably over halfway through the book to get to the part where she needs him to go travel to Spain with her to go to this wedding. But all of the stuff before that is just, it's just chef's kiss. It's so good. This is another great one to read like in the summer or if you're going on vacation somewhere because it has that travel aspect to it. But yeah, you can pretty much read this anytime, specifically because of Aaron Blackford, because he is just so hot. And I will definitely be picking up anything else Elena Armas comes out with because this was just such a stunning romance. Okay, the next one that I read for that video is also a bit of a romance, but it's more of an emotional romance, and it's YA, and that is A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. I got the audiobook for this, and I was listening to it while doing like chores around the house, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm gonna have to sit down and annotate this while I listen because it's such beautiful writing. I saw so many reviews saying that the writing is really cheesy and that the story itself is just like really cheesy, and I just don't agree with that at all. I thought that this was so beautiful and so emotional. I don't know if it was just like the right book at the right time, but I wasn't expecting to love this one as much as I did. I'm not really into YA that much anymore. I'm leaning more towards adult reads now. And so I knew that this was YA going into it, so I guess my expectations were lower. But like you can see, I like annotated and I tabbed certain parts and underlined certain parts and wrote in certain parts. And I freaking bawled for the majority of this book. I cried so much. Okay, let me tell you what it's about. It follows Poppy and Rune, who are best friends. They meet when they're like 5 years old, when they're children. And when Poppy is really young, her grandma dies, but before she does, she gives Poppy this jar of paper hearts and says that Poppy needs to collect 1,000 boy kisses. Every time she has a kiss or a moment where she feels like her heart is going to burst with happiness, she needs to write it down on this paper heart and put it in the jar. Rune is originally from Norway, I think, and his father has to move back there for work. When they're like teenagers, he moves back and is gone for like a year, and she's like, it's okay, we'll keep in touch. And then for some reason, out of nowhere, she just like stops talking to him. She doesn't respond to anything, any calls, any texts, any letters or anything like that, and he has no idea why. And then he's finally able to move back to their town, and so he's like really mad that Poppy, like his best friend, just completely started ignoring him, and he doesn't know why. And then you find out why, and it's just this really emotional story, and it's so cute, and it's such a good love story. And honestly, there are so many beautiful, amazing quotes and passages that I wish I could just read them to you. It's just so good. And yes, I cried so much while reading this. I'm glad I had the audiobook because there were times when I was crying so hard that I like couldn't read the words on the page. If you're looking for a very beautifully written, emotional story, definitely pick this one up, but there's no way that I couldn't add this to my favorites list. The next one is another emotional story, and it is a bit of a romance, but I wouldn't say that this is a romance book. It's more about what's going on than about the actual romance. And that book is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I picked this up because I read and loved The House in the Cerulean Sea last year. It was one of my favorite books of the year and one of my favorite books of all time. And to be honest, I did like The House in the Cerulean Sea better, but I still really, really love this book. It deals a lot with death and grief and loss, and so it's a bit heavier of subject matter in this book. It follows Wallace, who is kind of an asshole. I'm not sure if he's just like a businessman or a lawyer or what he is, but he doesn't really care about anybody but himself. And one day he dies, and a Grim Reaper comes at his funeral to like take him to the afterlife. And this Grim Reaper ends up taking him to this little tea shop in the woods, which this is the little tea shop. It looks ridiculous and adorable. And the Grim Reaper takes him to the ferryman, who the ferryman is supposed to kind of prepare souls for the afterlife so that they are ready to move on from this world. And Wallace is definitely not ready to move on. He is still like shocked and in denial that he is dead and that he is now a ghost. And so he stays at this tea shop with the ferryman, whose name is Hugo, and they develop this like friendship, and Hugo is just so patient. And again, there's just a lot of very beautiful lines and passages in this, and I just thought this was a really fun, not a fun read, but like a fun take on the afterlife. Like I thought it was very fascinating because we don't know what happens after you die, and so I thought it was kind of an interesting take on what might happen after we die. And of course, I love TJ Klune's writing, so I did really, really like this one, and I wanted to add it to my favorites list because it was a favorite of the year, and I would definitely highly recommend this one. Next up is Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy. So this book, I owe all my love for this book completely to Ashley from Ashley's Little Library. She not only recommended this book to me, but she gifted it to me for my birthday. We buddy read this author's second book, Once There Were Wolves, because it was the book of the month pick. And so I was like, I'm kind of thinking of skipping this month. I don't really see anything. And then Ashley was like, this is one of my most anticipated releases of the year. Can't wait to read this. And I was like, okay, let me just get that book then. So we buddy read Once There Were Wolves, and I really, really liked that one. And she was like, I think you'll like Migrations even better. And then she gifted it to me, which was so kind. And she was not wrong. I loved this book so much more than Once There Were Wolves. Don't get me wrong, I loved Once There Were Wolves, but this book is just like on the next level, you know? I don't think that this book is going to be for everybody, but it's kind of a slower paced, I don't know what word I'm looking for, like introspective, I guess. It follows this woman, Franny, who is kind of obsessed with these birds, the Arctic tern. And in this world of migrations, it's set in the future where most species of animals have died. They are extinct. And this Arctic tern that she's like obsessed with makes like one of the longest migrations of any animal. It goes from the North Pole to the South Pole every year and back. So scientists are estimating that this is the last migration these Arctic terns will do. They think that they'll die out after they migrate south. And so Franny wants to follow these birds on their final migration. And so she's like trying to get a ride on this ship with this kind of ragtag team of people, and like trying to convince them that she wants to follow these birds, but it can also be like helpful and lucrative for them because they're fishermen. And yeah, so she goes on this journey with them. But then you also start finding out things about Franny's past and what kind of led her to where she is now. And it's a little bit mysterious, but I just loved this so much. The writing in here is absolutely stunning. And honestly, I really got invested in the migrations of these Arctic terns. There was a lot of great conversation about climate change and like how humans are adding to climate change and how we really need to kind of change our ways if we don't want to end up like this world in migrations where most things are dead. But yeah, this was just such a beautiful story that I wasn't expecting. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's not like it's super fast paced or action packed or anything like that, but it's just really beautiful. And yeah, I really like this one. So definitely added it to my favorites of 2021 list, and I want to do a reread of this one very, very soon. Okay, now we're getting to the top 3 books here. So I saved these top 3 for last. These 2 that I'm going to mention first before I mention my number 1 favorite book of the year I'm not ranking them in a specific order, okay? I'm just saying that right now, that these are the top 3. And I'm sure if you watched any of my videos this year, you'll know which 3 that it is, but here they are. So this one is Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. I read this book 3 times this year. I have tabbed and annotated the crap out of it. I really, really like this book. It is a hate to love. You know what? It's more like a friends to hate to love kind of story. So it follows Misha and Ryan, who got linked up to be pen pals. They're from different schools, and their teachers saw their names and assumed that they were the same gender, so they paired them up. And so they've been writing letters back and forth since they were in like the 5th grade, and they've become best friends. But they have this rule that they can only read each other's letters that they send. They can't look each other up on Facebook. They can't have each other's phone numbers or meet in real life because they don't want to ruin what like the special thing they have about their letters. but they become very close to each other. They become best friends through these letters that they send each other. And then one day at a party, Misha finds out who Ryan is, completely by accident, honestly. And he realizes that he really does not like who she is in real life. He thinks that she's completely different from how she is in her letters. She's so much more shallow and vapid in real life than she is in her letters. She's like a mean girl. And then something happens that Misha ends up at the same school as Ryan. But she doesn't know that it's the guy she's been sending letters to because he's going by a different name. So she doesn't like understand why he hates her so much, but she does not change who she normally is because she doesn't know that it's him. Like, she just acts like how she would normally act to anyone. And yeah, he just really doesn't like that. So like the tagline on the front says, "We were perfect together until we met." And honestly, I feel like this book is just so much more than what I just described. Like, that's the general plot of it, but it gets pretty deep and like, I don't know. I don't really know. I guess I'm not very good at expressing what it is I love specifically about certain books, but this one just like hit different. Like, I don't know. The character development in this book and like the emotional journey that these characters go on together and the romance are just like all wrapped up in this nice little package. And I know that it's being very hyped. Like, it was very hyped this year on Book Talk, and I think that's why like so many people have read it. And I'm really, really glad that I read it because I saw, again, Books with Chloe was mentioning it on her channel with Jamie from Jamie's Library and Caitlin from Kate Literature. And they were talking about this book and I was like, all right, let me check it out. And I bought it and I did not expect to love it as much as I did. But yeah, as soon as I finished it, I like immediately wanted to pick it right back up. And so I did. And then I reread it again later and it's still just as stunning on the third time. So this is a book that I will definitely be rereading in the future. And yeah, this book will hold a special place in my heart. It is not just a favorite of this year, but a new favorite book of all time. So yes, that's Punk 57. And then I have here Kingdom of the Curse by Carrie Maniscalco. This is another book 2 in the series. The first one is Kingdom of the Wicked. I freaking adored this book. I gushed about it for like a solid 6 minutes in one of my vlogs where I read this. This is a fantasy book, fantasy romance, but more on the lines of like fantasy, I would say, with a romance. But it follows this girl, Amelia, who is a witch, and her twin sister gets like brutally murdered. And so she's trying to solve and get vengeance for her sister's murder. And so she calls upon this demon from hell to kind of help her out and help her solve this mystery. And she gets kind of tangled up in this world of, you know, demons, I'll just say, just tangled up in this world, okay? And there is a romance in this and a bit of a murder mystery in the first book. And then this book, I can't say too much about because I don't want to spoil anything. I don't really want to say anything about this book, not even the setting, because it could be spoilers. But this book was, again, it was next level to what Kingdom of the Wicked was. Kingdom of the Wicked was one of my favorites of last year, and it was a 5-star. This one is a favorite of this year and a 5-star, but like on the next level of 5-star, if you know what I mean. And this is a new favorite of all time as well because I just love this one so much, and I've only read it the once, so I'm definitely going to need to reread this one because it's just so good. It's so good. Okay, and now we come to my favorite book that I read in 2021. If you can guess, I'm sure you can guess which book I haven't mentioned yet that you knew was going to be on this list, but I haven't mentioned it yet. It is none other than A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. Now, this is another very heavily annotated. This is another one that like hits different and holds a very, very special place in my heart. This follows the events of the original trilogy. So the A Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy, you know, A Court of Mist and Fury is my favorite book of all time. I just recently read it for the 10th time and I still cry every time I read it. I still love it so freaking much. So again, I don't want to say too much about this one in case you haven't read the original trilogy yet, but just know it is a high fantasy story involving Fae. The original trilogy follows Feyre, and yeah, again, don't want to say too much about that one. This book follows Nesta, and it's another like very emotional story, especially with everything that happened in the original trilogy. It's just so stunning, and I loved the romance in this, but my favorite thing about this book, apart from the like mental health aspect of it, and seeing Nesta kind of heal. My favorite thing about this book was by far and away the female friendships. I just absolutely loved the characters in this book and I grew very attached to them, so I really hope that we see more of them. I read this one twice this year and I'm hoping to get another reread in before the end of the year, and if I can't, that's fine, I'll just read it again in January, but I do want to reread this one soon because I just finished my reread of A Court of Frost and Starlight. I read A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Wings and Ruin, and A Court of Frost and Starlight, and now I want to reread this one. And yeah, it's just very powerful and beautiful and emotional, all the things, okay? And yeah, the more I think about it, the more I'm very, very certain that this is my favorite book of this year, and definitely a new favorite book of all time, as I've said for the last couple books. But yeah, this one just, it's just so gorgeous. I love it. So yes, those are all of my favorite books, my top 10 favorite books of 2021. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know if any of these made your top 10 or made your favorites list of 2021. And let me know in the comments if you were surprised at all by my top 3. Especially if you watch my videos like regularly, you'll have seen those books mentioned several times. But yeah, at the time that I'm filming this, I still have like half the month of December left, so there is a potential that I could read another favorite of the year, but we'll have to see. So definitely follow my Goodreads and my Instagram in case you're curious about what I'm going to be picking up for the rest of the year, and if I do find a new favorite, I will surely be talking about it somewhere on one of those, and probably in a vlog for here because, you know, yes. So yes, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!